So we're looking at question 3 in the assignment, the Z-tab question. And we're wondering about getting the right P equation, because now it's a Q equation. So we want to get P as a function of Q so we can draw our downward sloping demand curve. Well, we assume it's downward sloping. At least it is, probably is now, because it says they currently enjoy a patent monopoly in these areas. And it says that the demand is 15 minus 0.2 P. So here's our Q as a function of P. This is just algebra, but as always, let me try to confuse things just so that I'm not giving you the exact question that we're interested in. So this is the question that we are supposed to do, but I'm going to go like this and say, let's do a completely unrelated question like that. Move the P over, 0.1 P equals 20 minus Q. So I just move my P to the other side, move my Q to the other side, so I can get the P's on the same side. I can get the P all by itself. And then I'll just divide by that 0.1, which is essentially multiplying by 10. And let me put this in parentheses. So we'll just verify everything. Equals 20 divided by 0.1 is 200. 1 divided by 0.1 is 10. So P has to be 200 minus 10Q. So then if you had values of P's and Q's, if this is a monopoly, then I probably want a marginal revenue curve. Total revenue would be the 200Q minus 10Q squared, because I'm going to multiply the P equation by Q. So 200Q minus 10Q squared. So that marginal revenue is just the 200 again minus 20Q. And I'll make an MR equation. Graph that should work. And what if I can do this? Oh, and just look how much time I just saved us. So in case we missed that, when I double-clicked on the graph somehow, you get the little bars showing. And if I can click on that little corner and drag it over here and say I want that column also, then you get a nice little curve that looks like that. So hopefully you could take what I've done and translate it into the Z-tab example. There's other information in the question that you may need that you may not need. Let's say marginal cost for us will be 15. That's pretty small. We'll call ours 30. Well, we'll call ours 70. Not sure how this will work. I'm just making these up on the fly. But if this marginal cost curve is constant, this will just be 70 no matter what the quantity is. So here's my price line, here's my marginal revenue line, here's my marginal cost. One of the questions is the first question, what wholesale price will Merck Labs set? As we've always said, profit maximizing firms want to set where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And that happens here. I can see in the picture where it is. And it looks like it's not going to line up right at 7. You might be able to eyeball and just guess 6.5 because it kind of looks like that's where it is. So if I'm just figuring out where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, then it's just the 200 minus 20Q equals 70. 200 minus 70 equals 20Q. Q is 130 over 20. And like I said, that's probably around 6.5. Well, I know that's the second part of the question. The second part of the question is how much Z-tab will it produce and sell? So I actually solve that first because I end up always solving the quantity first. And then you have to, from there you have to figure out what the price is going to be. So I know that again, I don't have 6.5 in my table. I didn't have it in my picture here. And you could probably guess it's going to be 135. But might as well plug it back into the equation just to be sure. So I had my price equation here. So price is 200 minus 10 times Q. So if I plug that in, 200 minus 10 times the 6.5, yep, you get the price of 135. Then again, I could eyeball that by saying, well, this 6.5 quantity, if I follow that up to the demand line, well, it's kind of hard when my demarcations are just 100 and 150, but I can solve it, directly. So part A, what wholesale price, how much will they produce, how much profit does the firm make? Current production costs are constant and equal to $5 per unit. So these would be constant and equal to that. So here's their costs. It's their marginal cost and their average cost will be similar to that too. The average total cost, also equal to a TC if it's constant. So then, how much profit do I make? Well, might be easier to draw some pictures here, or some shapes actually, just to get a sense of what's going on. So here's my 6.5 spot, and it doesn't need to be blue because there's enough blue stuff in there. Another blue line. So then this we said was at about 135. Make that color. Just because I'm going to be doing a triangle here, and I got to be able to see what my triangle is doing. So we have something similar. We have our costs here. We figured out what our profit would be, we figured out what our quantity would be, and in the figure 14.1, that quantity was 3,000, their point E, because that's where marginal revenue, marginal costs are. So that was their quantity. Their price was 7. And for us, the quantity was 6.5, and our price was 135. As far as what our profits would be, they use that picture in a bit of a different discussion, but the picture itself will be helpful, I guess. Well, our profit's going to be our price above our costs. So we're selling 3,000 units, and we're selling at a price of 7 when our costs are only 4. So we're having a profit of $3 per unit times 3,000 units. So there'd be a $9,000 profit in here. If we go back to here, just looking for basically the area of this rectangle, because the orange top part of the orange line is our price, 135, and our costs were the 70. The average total cost was 70. So we are selling 6.5 units. I guess I should write all this out. Profit is the price minus average total cost times our quantity. The total profit, not the profit per unit. The profit per unit is the price minus the average total cost, or the 135 minus the 70. And then the total amount of profit is that each unit we sell gets that profit margin times the 6.5. So 135 minus 70 times 6.5. And I should probably do this. Price minus my average total cost times the quantity. So I get a profit of 423. If I measure the area of this rectangle here, the area of that rectangle would be $423. How much annual profit does the firm make? Right now, this firm has some, it says in the question, this firm enjoys a patent monopoly. Once the patent goes away, and once these other firms can start doing it, if there's going to be more firms enter in, the market's going to become more competitive. And you guys are familiar with generics, and there's no labels, they're pretty cheap. So the market essentially becomes competitive because you have not only Claritin, you have like the Walgreens version of it and the Rite Aid version of it and the Walmart version of it. The market is going to become fairly competitive, and we had a presumption in the purely competitive chapter about what happens to price when in a purely competitive market. We always said that you always want to set marginal revenue equal marginal cost, but in a competitive market we had a different rule, and we had a sense of once these companies come in, then the price is always going to end up being at a particular level relative to some of these other terms that we've been talking about. The monopoly is able to charge this price of 135, but once these new firms come in, then you can expect that the monopoly is not going to be able to continue charging $135 anymore. The price is going to go down, and I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, how far is it going to go down? Yeah, so if you look at page 665, I probably could have saved everyone a lot of time. If you look at page 665, it says, talking about this Louisiana white shrimp industry down in the second section, market power and deadweight loss. It says, initially, let's suppose the industry is perfectly competitive. Blah, 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 things happen. And then at the bottom, the last incomplete paragraph, it says, now suppose that a consortium of investors form a company called Shrimp Depot. blah, 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 transforming the industry into a pure monopoly. That whole discussion of what's happening there on page 665 to 667, I guess, is talking about an industry that starts competitive and then becomes a monopoly. Well, what's happening in your question? Your question is basically doing the reverse, right? Because you're starting as a monopoly because you have this patent, and then the patent expires. So it's basically the reverse of what's happening in the Louisiana white shrimp industry. And I don't know if I went through it too much in the video because there was only one set of slides. I don't know if but at least the book has a good discussion of how to figure things out. And it's got a picture here that looks similar to what our picture looks like. Because we said, when we figured out what the monopoly profit was, we said it was the area of this green-orange rectangle.
Right.
Yeah, this discussion of the deadweight loss, and they'll talk about consumer surplus also. They call it social surplus at one point of the discussion, and then they get into consumer surplus after that. So I think if you look over that discussion in the chapter,
so the deadweight loss is not the same as consumer surplus.
No, in the way they're doing it here, I'll use this question instead of the Excel one that I did. So we started where this market was competitive, and as it will say, when it's competitive, again, the price. I mean, these competitive firms always set price equal marginal cost. So you had your demand curve here, or the price line, and you had your costs, this LMC line. This market's going to end up. This competitive market's going to end up at point C. They conveniently label it point C. For a competitive price, I mean, every firm has costs of $100, and since there's so many firms out there, the highest price they're able to charge is to recoup their costs. So the highest price they end up charging is $100 also. So this $100 is their price, and it's also their marginal costs, also their average total cost also. So they start by selling 20,000. Well, 20,000 units are sold by all of the shrimp firms, and the price is $100. But once the market becomes monopolized, then you get this splitting off of this marginal revenue line. The single firm that results, this consortium, says, well, we're a monopoly now. We want to set marginal revenue equal marginal cost. And so they end up saying, well, E is that point where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. And so it becomes profit maximizing for us to sell 10,000 units now. And if we're going to sell 10,000 units, and there's only us now, there's no other companies out there selling, then we don't have to sell our shrimp at our costs. We can sell it at whatever the market is willing to pay to buy 10,000 units. So they do the same thing that we've always done with monopolies, is figure out where this quantity is and then trace it up to the price line, and that becomes your new price. Before, when it was competitive, you had, again, the price the consumers were paying was only $100. You had all these demanders, all these consumers who were willing to pay more than that, because the demand line is higher than $100 in a lot of places, but they didn't have to. You had some people who really love white shrimp, and they were willing to pay $290 for it, but they don't have to. When it's competitive, they only have to pay $100. You had some people who were willing to pay $130 for Louisiana white shrimp, but in a competitive situation, they don't have to. They only pay $100. So we talked about consumer surplus as the amount of happiness that people obtain when the price that they are charged is below what they'd be willing to pay. And the demand curve represents what they're willing to pay. The price represents what they actually pay. So we can talk about consumer surplus as this triangle that's at like point A, point B, and point C, that triangle there. So if we had to calculate the consumer surplus, which I kind of remind you, for measuring consumer surplus, recall that the area of a triangle is 1/2 times the base times the height. So I could figure out how much happiness these consumers have by figuring out the area of this triangle. And I know what the base is. It's 20,000 units. I know what the height is. It's this 300 minus 100, so it's a 200 height of this triangle. And you multiply those two and take half of that. We'll give you the area of this triangle, the consumer surplus. And so consumer surplus is happiness, consumer happiness. When this monopoly comes in, though, the price gets bumped up to $200 instead. There used to be people who were willing to pay $130 for this white shrimp, and when the price was $100, they bought it and they were happy. But for people who are only willing to pay $130, they're not willing to pay $200. So they don't buy shrimp anymore. They're not happy about it. They don't obtain any happiness from buying shrimp because they didn't buy any shrimp. And the only people who are happy now are those people who are willing to pay above $200, which is a smaller group of people. So if there are people who are willing to pay $230 and the market price is now $200, well, the monopoly price is now $200, then, well, those people are still happy. They were even happier when the price is $100, but they're still happy when the price is $200 because they're willing to pay $230. So after the monopoly comes in, you still have some consumer surplus. It's just much smaller. It's this smaller triangle of A, F, and M. And again, you could figure out what the area of that triangle is too, because you've got the base and the height and all that stuff. This monopoly coming in has made consumers worse off. And you can see that a couple ways. I mean, you can see that there's not as much shrimp being bought. And you can assume it's going to be true because the price went up. So both of those things suggest that consumers are worse off. You have less shrimp being bought, the price is going up. So consumers are harmed by this market becoming less competitive. In a social sense, if there's harm placed on some group of people, but there's benefit from that outcome that goes to another group of people, then maybe the outcome isn't necessarily bad. So even though there is some harm that comes to consumers from this industry becoming monopolized, there is some benefit that goes to the company from being monopolized in the form of their profit. I mean, before these companies didn't make much profit at all. I mean, it was zero profit because they're perfectly competitive. When the market becomes a monopoly, well, the consumers are harmed, but the company gets better because they're able to get this, they sell 10,000 units and they sell it for $100 of profit per unit. So all of this little pink box represents the monopoly profit. So they're better off. The company is happier. But if I think about how much consumer surplus there was before, this big triangle A, B, C, and I say, well, when this market becomes monopolized, what happens to all of that consumer surplus that we had before? Well, some of those consumers are still happy. So there's still some consumer surplus left that people enjoy, A, F, and M. So these people are still happy. I mean, they were happy before, but they're still happy now, even though it's monopolized. Some of those consumers who are worse off, well, there's actually some benefit that goes to the monopoly from that. So the monopoly gets this profit. So the companies are better off. The company is better off, or the consortium is better off. But there's still some area of consumer surplus that just kind of gets lost forever. It evaporates, that no one is able to enjoy. Again, some of the consumer surplus that was lost under the competitive case, well, some of the consumers still retain that, and the monopoly retains some of it. But there's another section of my consumer surplus triangle that no one is able to enjoy. And we call that deadweight loss, meaning that it was consumer surplus that consumers used to enjoy when this market was competitive. But now that it's monopolized, no one enjoys that happiness anymore. The previous consumers don't do it. The monopoly doesn't kind of take it upon themselves. It's just lost happiness that no one gets from this market being uncompetitive. So the ideas of consumer surplus and deadweight loss are certainly different, even though we always usually describe them in this same sort of a discussion because we're looking at these curves and measuring these areas. So I mean, you could measure the amount of deadweight loss that happened too, because the base of this triangle is 10,000 units, and the height of this triangle is 100 units. And so you could figure out the dollar amount of deadweight loss that occurs from this market being monopolized too. When this is a competitive market, then we said that, well, people are paying a price of 100 and they're willing to pay up to what the demand curve is. So all these people who are willing to pay 299 and 230 and 170 and 101, all those people who only have to pay a price of 100, well, they're happy about this competitive situation. So this triangle here, this little triangle here represents the consumer surplus when the market is competitive. I'm going to move it over here just to you'll be able to kind of see why I'm doing this. So I'm just going to move it over here. This is the amount of happiness that consumers got when the market was competitive, when the price was way down at $100. Now that the market is a monopoly, though, again, you'll still have some consumers who are happy. So these people who are, again, willing to pay 250, thereabouts, any price above 200, those people are still happy because they only have to pay a price of 200. So if you're willing to pay 201 or 290 and you only have to pay 200, then you're happy. So even though the market is competitive, there's still going to be some consumers out there who feel like it's a good deal to buy white shrimp for $200 a basket. Well, let me bring this over and kind of put it on top of this. We also said that being a monopoly generates profit for the company, and so they're happy about that. The monopolist is happy about their profit. There's a monopoly profit. They benefit from this market not being competitive anymore. I'm going to put that over here. Here's the total happiness from consumers of the market being competitive. When the market is not competitive anymore, you still have some people who feel like this is a good thing. You have some consumers who still feel like it's a good thing because they're still willing to pay above the monopoly price even. And the monopolist out here feels like this is a good thing. But I'm still going to have this area here left over. I'm still going to have this area here left over, which represents happiness that consumers used to enjoy when the market was competitive. But nobody enjoys any happiness here. Nobody benefits from the monopoly situation. The only beneficiaries of the monopoly situation are this top triangle and the monopoly profit. There's no other beneficiaries from this monopoly situation. So there used to be these people who benefited that don't anymore. And so this is just, again, this is loss that's kind of squandered because the market is not competitive anymore.
So for argument's sake on this graph, using the numbers, the people that are unhappy are the 10,000 people from 10,000 to 20,000 of quantity they can't buy anymore. Mm-hmm. And the 10,001 person was going to buy it at $199.
Yep. But they don't anymore because the market price is above what they're willing to pay.
So that is just everybody that can't have a quantity because monopoly's not producing it.
Yeah.
I mean, they would pay those prices.
If it helps to personalize it or to anthropomorphize it, and sometimes in the principles class I explained that you can think of a demand curve as you line everyone who wants to buy white shrimp, you line them up. And you line them up in such a way that the person who wants this thing the most, you put them at the very left side of the line. And so this is the person that wants to buy this shrimp the absolute most, and they're willing to pay $300 for it. And then you have everyone else line up, as in decreasing desire for this shrimp. So as people line up, and I've got 10,000, the 10,000th person out here, they're willing to pay $200 a basket for this thing. The 20,000th person in line is willing to pay $100 for that. The 20,001st is willing to pay only $99 or whatever. So yeah, imagine if you were the 10,001st person, and when the market was competitive, you were willing to pay $199 to get this shrimp as the 10,001st person. You're willing to pay $199. So when the market was competitive, well, you're happy because you're willing to pay $199, and when the market is competitive, its price was only $100. So you feel like you're coming out $99 ahead. So you love the situation. You love the market being competitive. You love the price being $100. When this market becomes, and let's say you have a friend who's 2 spots behind you, and your friend is the 9,999th person in line, and they're willing to pay $201. So when the market is competitive, both of you are happy because you only have to pay $100 for this. But your friend is willing to pay $201, you're willing to pay $199. So you're both happy. But when the market becomes monopolized, your friend still ends up being happy because they were willing to pay $201, and now the market price is $200. So they're certainly not as happy as they were before, but they still feel like, well, I'm still getting a good deal because I was willing to pay $201 for the shrimp, and I'm only having to pay $200. So they go home, and they've got their shrimp, and they go home happy, and they come out feeling like they're $1 ahead. What about you, though? Well, you just go home empty-handed, and you say, not empty-handed. You voluntarily go home. You say, well, I was really only willing to pay $199 for this, and now the price is $200. So I'm just not going to have shrimp today, I guess. So this is happiness that you used to enjoy when the market was competitive, that now that it's a monopoly, well, you don't have that happiness anymore. So you just go home. And all that, enjoyment that you got from eating shrimp when the market was competitive, you don't get that anymore. Your friend still does, but you don't. So again, this is all happiness that people used to enjoy when the market was competitive, that they're not able to enjoy now.